Look at any interstate highway in America right now, and you will see the moving muscle of the United States economy. 18-wheelers rolling down the tarmac, carrying everything from fresh produce and flat-screen televisions to industrial steel and overnight e-commerce packages. To the untrained eye of an outsider, this looks like an absolute license to print money. You buy a heavy-duty tractor, hitch a trailer to the back, hire a driver, charge a fee per mile, and watch cash flow directly into your corporate bank account every single time a pallet touches a loading dock. It sounds almost insultingly straightforward. A physical transaction so foundational to human commerce that it feels immune to economic disruption. And if you look at the surface-level industry data, the narrative appears bulletproof. In 2024, the United States commercial trucking sector generated an eye-watering $906 billion in gross revenue, nearly $1 trillion flowing through a single industry. It is widely marketed as one of the most reliable, battle-tested pathways to building multi-generational wealth in corporate America, except for one small, terrifying detail. It is a complete mirage. The distance between what owning a trucking fleet looks like from the outside and how brutal the operational math actually is on the inside represents one of the most dangerous financial traps in modern capitalism. Trucking is not a transportation business. What you are actually operating is a high-leverage financial derivative, where your daily operating expenses are brutally fixed by contract, law, and physical mechanics, while your top-line revenue is violently dictated by a spot market completely outside your control. You can execute everything flawlessly. You can acquire top-tier equipment, hire immaculate drivers, secure premium freight agreements, and still watch your business bleed capital for 3 consecutive years. You can operate a company for nearly a century, grow your footprint to 30,000 employees, command a $5 billion market valuation, and still watch 99 years of corporate history evaporate into Chapter 11 bankruptcy in less than 3 weeks. In this business, the razor-thin line between a legendary profit year and total financial annihilation for a single rig can be the difference between making $8,000 in net income and taking a $25,000 cash loss. Before you commit a single dollar of investment capital or sign an equipment lease, you need to dissect the brutal, unvarnished financial plumbing of the American trucking industry. Let's dismantle this machinery piece by piece, starting at the absolute beginning, the entry fee. Before you can haul a single pound of commercial freight across state lines, you need equipment. And heavy commercial equipment does not come cheap. A brand new Class 8 diesel tractor, the heavy-duty sleeper cab you see pulling long-haul freight across the country, will cost you between $120,000 and $200,000 straight off. The dealership lot. And remember, that 6-figure invoice only covers the power unit. The tractor itself generates zero revenue unless it is pulling a trailer. If you want to haul standard dry goods, electronics, or furniture, a dry van trailer adds another $40,000 to $70,000 to your balance sheet. If your business model requires temperature-controlled logistics to transport fresh poultry, pharmaceuticals, or frozen dairy, you need a refrigerated unit, known in the industry as a reefer trailer. A new reefer trailer will push your trailer cost up to $85,000 or $90,000. So, before you have hired a driver, purchased fuel, or negotiated a single shipping contract, your baseline capital expenditure for one brand new refrigerated rig sits between $200,000 and $290,000. Because those upfront capital requirements terrify most first-time operators, the vast majority of newcomers bypass the new equipment market entirely and head straight for the used commercial vehicle market. On paper, this looks like financial genius. A 4 to 7-year-old sleeper tractor with 400,000 to 700,000 miles on the odometer typically trades for $35,000 to $75,000. To an aspiring fleet owner, picking up a Class 8 tractor at a 70% discount off original sticker price feels like an irresistible bargain. It is not a bargain. It is a ticking financial time bomb. Commercial diesel engines are engineered to run between 1 million and 1.5 million miles, over their operational lifespan if maintained with religious discipline. However, as a commercial vehicle crosses the 500,000-mile threshold, it enters what heavy equipment mechanics call its secondary wear cycle. This is the precise engineering phase where major, highly complex mechanical components begin failing in rapid succession. At 750,000 miles, a Class 8 engine overhaul will cost you $25,000 out of pocket. A transmission replacement will easily wipe out $15,000. The complex diesel emissions system, a delicate network of particulate filters, sensors, and catalytic converters mandated by federal law, frequently clogs or fails on high-mileage rigs, costing $4,000 per service visit. That bargain, $50,000 used truck can easily slap you with $35,000 in emergency mechanical repair bills in its very first year of operation. By the time you add up the acquisition cost and the immediate mechanical intervention, you have spent as much as a new tractor would have cost, except you have zero warranty protection. And here is the fatal catch that destroys small fleets. While your used truck is sitting on blocks inside a diesel repair shop for 3 weeks, waiting for back-ordered parts, it is generating exactly $0 in revenue. Meanwhile, your monthly loan payments, commercial insurance premiums, and administrative overhead do not take a vacation just because your wheels aren't turning. Even if you possess the cash reserves to acquire your equipment outright, you cannot legally turn the key until you navigate a maze of federal and state regulatory requirements. This is the administrative toll booth that every new commercial motor carrier must pay, and it drains capital long before your tires touch public pavement. First, you must apply for operating authority as a motor carrier through the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, an agency operating under the United States Department of Transportation. That filing costs $300 and consumes 3 to 5 weeks of administrative waiting time. Next comes the International Registration Plan, or IRP plate. This is the registration license that allows a commercial vehicle to operate legally across multiple U.S. states and Canadian provinces without buying individual trip permits at every single state border. Depending on how many states your fleet intends to cross, IRP plates will cost you between $1,500 and $3,500 per truck every single year. Then comes the Federal Heavy Vehicle Use Tax, known as IRS, Form 2290, which levies a mandatory $550 annual tax on every commercial vehicle operating above 55,000 pounds gross vehicle weight. Next, you must register for the International Fuel Tax Agreement, or IFTA. IFTA is an intricate quarterly tax accounting framework that tracks every gallon of diesel fuel purchased in each state versus the exact mileage driven in that state, redistributing fuel tax revenues across jurisdictions. You are also legally required to enroll every driver in a mandatory drug and alcohol testing consortium, install an integrated electronic logging device inside the cab to automatically log driver hours of service, and equip your rig with commercial-grade GPS navigation and fleet management telematics software. None of these administrative compliance requirements are optional. Every single item is enforced by state highway patrols and federal inspectors under threat of impoundment and massive civil penalties. And not a single one of these dollars moves a single box of freight. When you tally up registration fees, tax filings, compliance software, and administrative setup costs, you are looking at $3,000 to $11,000 per truck in pure regulatory overhead before paying for fuel, insurance, or driver labor. Now, let's assume you have one Class 8 tractor-trailer combination, legally registered, fully compliant, and standing ready to haul freight. What does it actually cost to run that single vehicle for 1 full year? To understand the economics, we must look at a standard long-haul operational profile, one truck running 120,000 miles per year. Let's break down the unavoidable baseline expenses using empirical operational data from the American Transportation Research Institute. First, driver compensation. Federal regulations strictly cap commercial driving hours at 11 hours per day following a 10-hour off-duty period. To keep a long-haul truck moving 120,000 miles annually, you must employ a dedicated, highly qualified commercial driver. In 2024, total driver compensation including base mileage pay, health benefits, performance bonuses, and payroll taxes averaged 99.5 cents per mile. Across a 120,000-mile operational year, driver compensation alone drains $119,000 from your operating account. Second, diesel fuel. A fully loaded Class 8 truck weighing 80,000 pounds gross gets an average fuel economy of 6 to 7 miles per gallon. With national diesel prices floating around $4.50 per gallon, your fuel expenditure calculates to roughly 69 cents per mile. Over 120,000 miles, you will pump $83,000 worth of diesel directly into your fuel tanks. Third, equipment debt service or lease payments. If you financed a late-model tractor and trailer setup, your monthly debt service will average 39 cents per mile, translating to $47,000 annually in principal and interest payments. Fourth, maintenance, tires, and routine repairs. Even if your truck experiences zero catastrophic mechanical failures, basic wear and tear maintenance is brutal. A Class 8 rig rolls on 18 commercial tires, with steer tires costing up to $800 apiece. Factor in routine oil changes that require gallons of heavy-duty synthetic oil, brake shoe replacements, air filter changes, and electrical diagnostics. Operational maintenance averages 20 cents per mile, consuming $24,000 per year just to keep the vehicle in roadworthy condition. Fifth, commercial liability insurance. Insurance costs for commercial motor carriers have exploded. The baseline cost for primary auto liability, physical damage, and cargo coverage reached 10.5 cents per mile in 2024, or roughly $12,200 per year for an established fleet. However, if you are a new carrier operating under fresh authority, insurance underwriters view you as a high-risk gamble. Premiums for new operators routinely hit $20,000 per truck annually. Sixth, overhead, tolls, and software subscriptions. Transponder tolls, quarterly IFTA filings, load board subscription fees, telematics data plans, and accounting software add another $6,000 per year. Now, let's do the cold, hard math. Add up these line items: $119,000 for driver labor, $83,000 for diesel fuel, $47,000 for equipment payments, $24,000 for maintenance, $12,000 for insurance, and $6,000 for administrative overhead. The absolute operational baseline to run a single commercial truck for 1 year is $291,000. That is your expense floor before your business generates its first cent of net profit. So, how does a trucking carrier actually generate revenue to cover that staggering $291,000 expense stack? The revenue mechanism is simple. A shipper, whether it is a retail titan like Walmart, an industrial manufacturer, or an agricultural producer, needs freight transported from a distribution center in Chicago to a warehouse in Atlanta. They hire a motor carrier and pay a fixed dollar rate per mile. Throughout 2024 and heading into 2025, the average spot market rate for standard dry van freight across the national network hovered between $2 and $2.50 per mile. Let's take the top end of that spot market range, $2.50 per mile. If your truck runs 120,000 miles at $2.50 per mile, your gross top-line revenue for the entire year equals $300,000. On the surface, bringing in $300,000 in top-line revenue sounds impressive to an amateur operator. But now, subtract your baseline operational expenses of $291,000. You are left with exactly $9,000 in net operating profit. Let that sink in. $9,000 in net income for an entire year of round-the-clock operational stress, managing 80,000 pounds of dangerous rolling steel, navigating federal safety audits, and taking on hundreds of thousands of dollars in personal equipment liability. On $300,000 of gross revenue, a $9,000 profit represents a net margin of roughly 3%. And that razor-thin 3% margin only exists if absolutely everything goes perfectly. That assumes zero major engine breakdowns, zero traffic accidents, zero unassigned freight delays, zero driver turnover, and zero mid-year insurance spikes. If a single fuel injector fails or a tire blows out on a remote stretch of highway requiring emergency roadside service, your entire $9,000 annual profit vanishes into thin air. If a 3% profit margin sounds terrifying, the situation gets far worse when you realize that your revenue per mile is constantly exposed to violent market forces that have absolutely nothing to do with your operational efficiency. The freight market operates on brutal, textbook supply and demand dynamics. When consumer demand for physical goods is soaring and commercial trucks are scarce, freight rates skyrocket. When the market is flooded with excess trucking capacity and cargo volumes drop, rates collapse into the abyss. In 2020 and 2021, the global pandemic completely distorted American consumer behavior. Millions of citizens confined to their homes diverted their spending away from travel, dining, and live entertainment toward physical consumer goods and e-commerce. Supply chains froze, port congestion exploded, and the demand for commercial trucking surged to unprecedented heights. Spot market freight rates shot up to historical peaks, reaching $3.50 to $4 per mile on high-volume lanes. Fleet owners and owner-operators made money faster than at any point in modern logistics history. Seduced by massive cash returns, carriers ordered thousands of new trucks, expanded fleet sizes, and tens of thousands of new operators rushed into the market to secure their operating authority. Then came 2022. As pandemic restrictions lifted, American consumer spending shifted rapidly away from physical goods and back towards services and experiences. The artificial wave of physical cargo evaporated. However, the tens of thousands of new trucks ordered during the boom were still being delivered onto American highways. Almost overnight, the market found itself catastrophically oversupplied, with trucks competing for a shrinking pool of freight. Spot market rates did not just soften, they plummeted off a cliff. By 2023, and continuing throughout 2024, the industry plunged into what institutional logistics analysts officially branded the Great Freight Recession, the longest, most severe sustained market downturn in modern transportation history. Spot rates on critical shipping corridors collapsed below $2 per mile, and on many secondary lanes dropped under $1.50 per mile. The American Transportation Research Institute revealed that long-haul truckload carriers posted an average operating margin of negative 2.3% in 2024. The average cost to operate a Class 8 truck was $2.26 per mile, while spot market rates were coming in far below that threshold across massive swathes of the country. Think about the mathematical reality of those numbers. Fleet operators were literally paying out of their own pockets to haul freight for American corporations. The cost of burning diesel and paying driver wages exceeded the check written by the shipper. Between 2023 and 2025, more than 88,000 commercial trucking authorities were revoked or surrendered across the United States. In the first half of 2024 alone, nearly 10,000 motor carriers went completely out of business. This is the volatility trap. Your expenses, loan payments, insurance policies, administrative fees show up every single month with relentless precision. But your revenue fluctuates wildly based on a spot market you have zero power to control. If you think operational experience, massive scale, and century-long corporate history can protect a carrier from this economic math, consider the catastrophic downfall of Yellow Corporation. Yellow was not a small family fleet or an inexperienced startup. Founded in 1924, Yellow was a legendary, nearly 100-year-old titan of American industry. It stood as one of the largest less-than-truckload carriers in the United States, operating a complex nationwide network of regional freight terminals that consolidated pallet-sized shipments for industrial clients. At its absolute peak, Yellow was a $5 billion enterprise, employing 30,000 workers, including 22,000 union members, represented by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, and controlling a massive fleet of 12,000 Class 8 tractors and 35,000 freight trailers. Yet, in August 2023, Yellow ceased all operational activities, shuttered its terminal gates, and filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. 30,000 American workers lost their employment in a single afternoon, marking one of the largest corporate liquidations in United States history. How does a $5 billion logistics giant with 100 years of operating history collapse into total extinction? The answer is not managerial incompetence in driving trucks. The answer lies in the unforgiving physics of fixed costs paired with volatile revenue. Yellow had accumulated massive corporate debt over decades of aggressive acquisitions, carrying roughly $1.5 billion in outstanding debt obligations into 2023, including a controversial $700 million national security loan provided by the federal government during the pandemic. As freight rates collapsed during the 2023 recession, Yellow attempted to execute a critical operational restructuring plan known as One Yellow to consolidate its redundant terminal networks and slash operating overhead. However, fierce negotiations with the Teamsters Union stalled the restructuring effort. Sensing impending financial instability, freight shippers grew terrified that their cargo would get trapped in a strike or insolvency proceeding. Major corporate clients quietly pulled their freight and redirected cargo volumes to competing carriers like FedEx Freight and Old Dominion. In the first quarter of 2023, Yellow's shipment volumes plunged 13% year-over-year. In July 2023, Yellow defaulted on a mandatory $50 million pension and healthcare contribution to the Central States Health and Welfare Fund. The moment that news hit Wall Street, customer departures accelerated into a panic. Revenue evaporated in a matter of days, while debt obligations and terminal leases remained static. The company was trapped in a classic liquidity death spiral. When revenue drops in a high fixed-cost business, you cut costs, which compromises service quality, causing more customers to leave, which slashes revenue further. Once that negative feedback loop begins in trucking, mathematical survival becomes impossible. Not even a century of corporate legacy could save Yellow from the brutal physics of freight economics. While macroeconomic downturns can cripple large carriers, there is a silent operational killer that quietly destroys small fleet margins every single day. It is a metric known as deadhead miles, the total distance a commercial truck travels completely empty without any revenue-generating cargo in the trailer. In 2024, data from the American Transportation Research Institute revealed that the industry-wide average for empty miles rose to 16.7%. That means for every 100 miles, a commercial truck travels down the highway. Nearly 17 of those miles are driven hauling absolutely nothing but empty air. To understand how deadhead miles destroy profitability, let's look at a real-world dispatching scenario. Imagine your dispatcher finds a dry van load on a digital freight board, paying a strong rate of $2.60 per mile to haul freight 1,000 miles from Chicago to Atlanta. On paper, that load generates $2,600 in gross top-line revenue for a single day's run. It looks like an outstanding, highly profitable shipment. However, your truck is currently parked 200 miles away in Memphis, Tennessee. To pick up that cargo in Chicago, your driver must run 200 miles empty. That deadhead leg burns diesel fuel, consumes regulated driving hours, subjects engine components to wear and tear, and incurs insurance liability, all with zero revenue coming in. Now, let's recalculate your true operational yield. You earned $2,600 in total revenue, but your truck drove a total distance of 1,200 miles, 1,000 laden miles, plus 200 deadhead miles. Divide $2,600 by 1,200 total miles, and your true revenue yield drops from $2.60 per mile down to $2.17 per mile. Given that the average industry operating cost sits at $2.26 per mile, that load did not make your business a single dollar. In fact, hauling that shipment cost your company 9 cents per mile out of pocket, resulting in a net cash loss of $112. A load that appeared lucrative on the freight board became a financial loss the moment deadhead mileage was factored into the equation. This is why route optimization and dispatch intelligence are just as critical to fleet survival as securing high freight rates. Large national fleets operating thousands of trucks across dense terminal networks can route vehicles with surgical precision, matching incoming freight with nearby outgoing loads to keep empty mileage below 5%. For a small fleet running 5 or 10 trucks without advanced telematics, deadhead miles represent an invisible drain that continuously bleeds capital. There is another operational expense item that has soared faster than fuel prices or driver wages over the past decade, creating an existential crisis for small and mid-sized fleet operators. That expense is commercial auto liability insurance. Over the past decade, commercial liability insurance premiums for small fleets operating between 1 and 20 trucks have surged by 47%. The driving force behind this insurance rate explosion is a legal phenomenon known among corporate attorneys and insurance underwriters as nuclear verdicts, jury awards in personal injury lawsuits against commercial trucking fleets that exceed $10 million. According to legal research studies, the average value of nuclear verdicts handed down against transportation carriers jumped from $21 million in 2020 to an astounding $51 million in 2024. In 2024 alone, trial courts recorded 135 nuclear verdicts against commercial carriers, resulting in a collective $31.3 billion in jury awards. Consider the terrifying implications for a fleet owner. When you operate commercial trucks on public highways, you are not merely insuring against minor fender benders or cargo damage. You are insuring against the catastrophic legal exposure of a plaintiff attorney securing a $50 million jury award following a fatal highway accident. Underwriters have responded to these astronomical legal liabilities by fleeing the commercial transportation sector entirely. The remaining specialty insurance carriers have aggressively hiked policy premiums to protect their reserves against catastrophic risk. If a small fleet experiences a single safety blemish, a driver cited for speeding in a commercial zone, a minor logbook violation, or an unavoidable collision, their annual insurance premiums will instantly jump by 30 to 50% upon renewal. A single major accident can render a small fleet completely uninsurable. In commercial trucking, if you cannot secure liability insurance, you cannot legally operate on public roads, meaning your business is terminated overnight. Insurance is no longer a standard budgeted expense line item. It is an existential threat managed every single day. Faced with these razor-thin margins, almost every fleet owner who survives their initial years reaches a logical conclusion: I must scale. If making $9,000 per year on one truck is unsustainable, then owning 50 or 100 trucks should unlock massive economies of scale and generate real wealth. To a certain extent, that logic is mathematically correct. Scale unlocks undeniable competitive advantages in commercial transportation. When you operate a fleet of 100 trucks, you consume millions of gallons of diesel fuel annually. That volume allows you to bypass retail truck stop pump prices and negotiate corporate fuel card agreements, saving anywhere from 45 cents to $2 per gallon through bulk discounts. That single operational advantage can save a fleet $5,000 to $26,000 per truck every year. Scale also compresses commercial insurance premiums on a per-unit basis by spreading risk across a broader vehicle pool. Furthermore, a large fleet can build or lease its own internal maintenance facility and hire dedicated diesel mechanics, eliminating retail repair shop labor rates that charge $150 or more per hour. Most importantly, major retail shippers and Fortune 500 manufacturers will only award lucrative multi-year freight contracts to carriers that can guarantee large-scale equipment capacity. They will not even speak to a 3-truck operator. However, Scaling a fleet introduces a brutal operational trap known as the scaling paradox. A fleet of 100 trucks is no longer a simple trucking company. It is a complex corporate enterprise with massive administrative overhead. You suddenly require a dedicated safety director whose sole responsibility is managing driver compliance, monitoring ELD logs, and handling accident documentation. You need a full human resources department to manage recruitment, drug testing, and payroll for a workforce of 150 drivers and staff. You need specialized compliance officers to monitor constantly changing federal safety mandates. You must lease physical terminal yards in major metropolitan logistics hubs to park rigs, perform maintenance, and stage trailers leases that cost tens of thousands of dollars every month. At 100 trucks, the founder can no longer be a truck driver or a hands-on dispatcher. They must transform into a corporate chief executive officer, managing cash flow allocation, labor-union relations, insurance underwriting negotiations, telematics, technology contracts, and federal regulatory compliance simultaneously. The tragic reality of the logistics industry is that most fleet operators who excel at driving trucks or booking loads lack the executive skill set to manage complex corporate balance sheets. They scale their fleet up to 30 or 50 trucks, only to watch overhead expenses explode, driver retention collapse, and operational control dissolve into chaotic cash flow insolvency. To see precisely how tiny operational variances determine whether a fleet owner builds generational wealth or ends up in bankruptcy court, let's run two contrasting operational scenarios for a 10-truck fleet running 1,200,000 total miles per year. First, let's examine the optimistic scenario. You operate 10 Class 8 trucks. You have successfully secured multi-year dedicated contract lanes with a major regional grocery retailer at $2.75 per mile. Crucially, your contract includes an active fuel surcharge clause tied directly to the weekly National Diesel Price Index published by the Energy Information Administration. If diesel prices surge, your shipper automatically pays a higher surcharge, completely insulating your bottom line from fuel price volatility. Because your dedicated contract includes planned backhaul shipments, your deadhead mileage remains under 10%. Your drivers hold flawless safety records, keeping your commercial insurance premiums at the lower end of the spectrum, around $12,000 per rig annually. Under this pristine operational alignment, each truck generates $330,000 in gross annual revenue against $255,000 in total operating costs. Each truck yields $75,000 in net operating profit. Across your 10-truck fleet, you harvest $750,000 in net annual cash profit. That is a flourishing, highly defensible business that builds generational wealth over a decade. Now, let's examine the realistic downturn scenario. The macro freight market cools. When your dedicated grocery contract comes up for annual renewal, the retailer cuts your freight rate down to $2.30 per mile, pointing to lower bids submitted by competing carriers desperate for volume. Midway through the year, one of your drivers gets involved in a highway accident. While no one is severely injured, a personal injury law firm files suit, settling for $800,000. At your next insurance renewal, your underwriter hikes your fleet premium by 30%. To make matters worse, two of your high-mileage tractors suffer major mechanical failures, requiring engine overhauls. Due to global supply chain delays, one truck sits idle inside a dealership shop for 6 weeks, waiting for specialized engine parts, generating zero revenue while loan payments continue. Your empty deadhead miles creep up to 19% as your dispatcher scrambles to find spot market backhaul freight. What happens to your balance sheet? Under these entirely common operational setbacks, your net profit per truck collapses from $75,000 down to a range between negative $5,000 and positive $15,000. Across your 10-truck fleet, your annual financial result swings from a best-case profit of $150,000 to a devastating $50,000 cash loss. The gap between generating $750,000 in wealth and taking a $50,000 cash loss is not an exotic black swan disaster. It is simply one renegotiated contract rate, one highway lawsuit, and two mechanical breakdowns happening in the same operational year. There is one final financial trap that destroys 85 to 90% of all new fleet operators within their first 2 years in business. It is not a lack of freight, and it is not a breakdown on the highway. It is a fatal mismatch in cash flow timing. In commercial transportation, when your truck successfully delivers a shipment to a receiving dock, the shipper does not hand your driver a stack of cash or issue an immediate bank transfer. Commercial payment terms in the freight industry typically run 30, 60, or even 90 days after invoice receipt. However, your operational expenses operate on an unforgiving, real-time schedule. Your diesel fuel credit card must be settled every week. Your commercial drivers expect their payroll direct deposits every Friday. Your equipment, lease, payments, and insurance premiums are due on the 1st of every month. If you haul $100,000 worth of freight in January, you might not receive that cash in your bank account until April. But you must pay $50,000 in diesel, fuel, and driver wages throughout February and March out of cash on hand. If you enter this industry without 60 to 90 days of liquid operating capital held strictly in reserve, a 2-month delay in client payments will push your business into insolvency regardless of how profitable your freight rates appear on paper. The fleet operators who defy these brutal odds, those who build enduring, multi-million-dollar logistics enterprises, possess operational traits that have almost nothing to do with a love for big trucks. They calculate their exact cost per mile down to the 4th decimal place every single week. They refuse to buy equipment until they have signed binding dedicated freight contracts. They hold massive cash reserves capable of absorbing 3 consecutive months of depressed market rates. They invest heavily in fleet management software, predictive maintenance, telematics, and driver safety cameras. And above all, they treat driver retention as their most critical operational asset, knowing that replacing a driver costs thousands of dollars in recruitment, training, and lost equipment productivity. The next time you pull up alongside an 18-wheeler cruising down the highway at 65 miles per hour, take a closer look. You are looking at a $200,000 piece of mobile heavy machinery burning $50 worth of diesel fuel every single hour, piloted by a commercial driver whose total compensation costs nearly $1 per mile, hauling cargo that pays $2.50 per mile if the market is feeling generous that week. Owning a single truck is a brutal, relentless hustle. Owning a fleet of 100 trucks is an entirely different operational beast, a high-stakes corporate game played on razor-thin margins where the margin for error is non-existent. In the commercial trucking business, the operators who prevail are not those who love heavy iron. They are the ones who master the cold, unforgiving mechanics of money.